All right. Well, I wanted to welcome everyone to this meetup on careers in museum curation. And my name is Dr. Suzanne Voigt. I'm one of the coaches for Arts, Media, and Design. And today we have an amazing professional with us, Nathan Stalvey. Nathan's been in the museum field since 2001. He's worked in a variety of different types of museums, including historic homes, university museums, local historical societies, as well as corporate for-profit museums. And he really focuses a lot on exhibition, collection management, and has a special interest, and I found this pretty cool, Nathan, but a history of baseball, as well as colonial American history, among many of your other areas of interest. So with that, please further introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you got started in this field.
Sure. So I've been the director here at the Clarke County Historical Association for 6 years now. And I can tell you that at every stop that I've been in, it's all about wearing many different hats. If you would have gone back in time to ask me when I first got interested in working in the museum field, what my career aspirations were, it would have been, you know what, I want to work at the Smithsonian because that's the museum of all museums. I want to work at the Smithsonian and I want to, basically I just want to read all day and I just want to research all day. Well, fast forward 20 years and the research part of it, that's not the part that interests me as much anymore. It's more about as I'm more familiar in the museum field and all the careers and all the career choices, I found more of my niche. And I was like, you know what? I like the smaller museums. I like the wearing many hats. I like being the person that kind of has their hands in everything and kind of guides the direction of the organization. So when I first started out, so I was born and raised in South Carolina. I got an undergraduate degree in history. In my junior year, I had to figure out what I was going to do with that degree. Well, I didn't want to teach and I didn't want to go to law school, so my advisor got me set up with an internship at the University of South Carolina's McKissick Museum, and I loved it. Within the first week, I was working their exhibitions department, and I couldn't imagine doing anything else. So I stayed through there as an undergraduate, went straight into graduate school, working towards a master's degree in public history and museum management. And during that time, I worked on building a large nationally traveling exhibit from scratch from this professor's research. That was my 2.5-year graduate assistantship, was to take her research and turn it into a large traveling exhibit. So that was really, really fun. And then right after I graduated, pure luck, that the position that I really wanted, the traveling curator of traveling exhibits position, came open. And I was hired as the curator of traveling exhibits a month after that. So I stayed on full-time curator after I graduated for an additional 5 years. And like with many jobs in the museum field, when you're ready to move up, most museums don't have that upward mobility within that organization. You have to be willing to move and to advance. So I was like, okay, I feel like I've been a curator of temporary exhibits long enough. I'm ready to oversee an entire collection and oversee entire exhibits. So then I went to a for-profit museum in the corporate world at the Louisville Slugger Museum and Factory in Louisville, Kentucky. And I was director of exhibits and head of collections there. I was there for 4 years, and then with budget cuts, I was one of the first to be let go. The company underwent some really bad times, and unfortunately, so many of my colleagues were let go a year or 3 years later. And about 7 months later, I found this job at the Clarke County Historical Association as director. And given some of my past experience interning in graduate school and also a graduate fellowship at a similar museum up in Maine at the Old York Historical Society, I was able to fit in pretty quickly because my experience there, especially in Maine, this museum, there's a lot of similarities in its organizational structure, its admin, its their staff, the programs, the colonial American history background. But the biggest challenge was working for a board. Hands down, 21 years I've been doing museum, been in the museum field. And the biggest challenge is working for a board. It is very, very different than anything else you could possibly experience. And so that's me. That's how I've arrived where I'm at. Like I said, I've been here 6 years. I love every day that I come in. This is the best job that I've had. Each job has gotten better. This one is definitely the best. Sure, there are moments where it's stressful, absolutely. But my most stressful days are better than most of my best days at any other job I've
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Can you tell us, about what a typical day looks like for you? Is there a typical day? And
had.
maybe some of
There
the
is
things that you do, if there is more of a routine in some areas, what does that routine look like?
No, they're really, it depends on the time of year. If it's January, you're getting everything ready for your programs. You're building exhibits at the museum, getting ready for the warmer weather and you're getting back open to the public. If it's the summertime, you're basically overseeing the larger programs. You're starting to do midsummer fundraisers. You're launching a membership drive. You're getting your annual publication ready to go. If it's Christmas time, you're doing your annual giving campaign. You're overseeing your final exhibits of the year and start planning for the next year. That's most of my time is doing fundraising at the end of the year. You're also putting everything together for committee meetings and board meetings and staff meetings. Yeah, there really isn't a routine day. One thing I have found, though, honestly, that's helped is about a year ago, I started, on some advice from a friend of mine, I started sending to my board every couple of weeks updates on everything I've been doing in those 2 weeks. And I think that has definitely strengthened my relationship with the board because now they see, they just kind of see from the background and just in the meetings what we do. But when I bullet point out everything that I do in a span of 2 weeks, they're just blown away like, oh my, how do you do this? So, and it's kind of nice. You keep track of it. And then when you go for your performance review, you're handing them a novel of everything you've done. Here's everything I've done for the year. So yeah, so routine days. Definitely not. About the only routine day I would say would be Tuesdays when the bookkeeper comes in, and that's the day we do all the finances, go over the financial statements, and pay the bills and things like that. But other than that, no.
No, that's great. Thank you. I'm going to open it up to students now if you all have any questions. Don't be shy. We have a comment. Travis is wanting to know about a little bit more specifics when you say it's really challenging to work with a board. Can you explain a little bit more about that and what are some of the challenges?
So working for a board, you really need to understand your bylaws first. Like, how does the organization operate? What are the powers of the director, and what are the powers of the board? And understanding where that line is at. There are some board members who feel that they need to get down to the weeds on certain things. And there are other board members who are just very standoffish and say, you're the director, just let us know what's going on, and that's all I need to know. It's finding that happy medium. You want your board engaged, you want your board involved, but you don't want them involved to the point where they're micromanaged. Also, when you have a board of 13 like we do, it's almost like having 13 different bosses with 13 different backgrounds and 13 different personalities. So that can be a struggle. And the one thing you have to remember, it's not really 13 different bosses. It's one boss, the board. It's made of 13 parts. So one board member can't say, I know the rest of the board said this, but I need you to do that. No, that's not how it works. If it's a big decision, like if a board member comes, you says, hey, we need to spend $10,000 on this one item. Well, that's a big expense out of the budget. That is a board decision. But if a board member says, hey, I saw this one thing, what do you think about doing this one program for next year? Well, in that case, that's fine. It is really about juggling a lot of different personalities and making sure everybody gets on the same page. Because as the director, they kind of look to you as that person that implements the bigger picture. But they also indirectly look to you as that person that unifies everybody.
Yeah, that's great. And Travis gave some more additional comments in the chat. So it's the 13 different background parts that sounds challenging to Travis. Any additional advice on how to bridge those professional gaps? sending regular updates to your board sounds like a really good idea.
Yeah, that is definitely one of them. Another one is to know the strengths of those 13 different backgrounds. So, for example, when you look at our board, we're very fortunate that we don't have 13 people who just like history. If you're working at a history museum or a historical association, the last thing you want is to have a board full of people whose backgrounds are all in history. We have people with backgrounds in law, in buildings and grounds, historical archives, finance, fundraising. I mean, we have a lot. We even have another small museum director that's on our board that helps the board look at it from my perspective. So we've got many different backgrounds, and it's all about understanding everybody's strengths. And those separate people work on separate committees. Like our archives person heads our archives committee. Our building and grounds person heads our building and grounds committee. And so when they go to present, the rest of the board tends to listen to them. But each one of those committee heads, they work with the director. The director by default is on all the committees. So when you go into the full board meetings, you've got information from everybody. And that really does help, is really tuning into the strengths of why they're on that board and the strengths they bring to the board.
No, that's great. Thank you. Wesley also has a question around how have you dealt with funding or artifact acquisition issues?
We're all privately funded. So the way I handle that is I spend a lot of my time fundraising and grant writing. I cannot stress enough the importance of grant writing skills when you go into this field. If you don't have those, it's going to be tough to advance in your field. If you do have those, you're going to move up pretty quickly. That's really what keeps us afloat. The grant writing certainly helps. Identifying grants to help out on certain projects. It could be small projects, it could be large projects. Getting those in to help out with those certain projects. Showing the results of those projects to donors in the community. This is what we've done. That's the way. You can't think of fundraising as, well, if you fundraise, it's good because we're a nonprofit and you're helping out the community. You can't think of fundraising as approaching people to invest. Donors want to see a return on their investment, period. So you sitting down, they like to have their ego stroked, the larger donors. So it's very important to get out into the community, meet those larger donors, sit down with them, tell them about what your organization's about. Start small. If they're first time, start small. Say, hey, look, for a donation of this will help us achieve this. And once that's achieved, you go back to them, not to ask them for money again, but say, hey, just wanted to let you know, here's what happened, and look at how great this is done. This has exceeded our expectations, and we couldn't have done it without you. Thank you so much. And nice little handwritten letters from time to time, just to especially to the larger donors. That goes a long way, because then it's that personal attention that they see. They're like, okay, I'm making a difference, is what they're starting to think then. And as far as the smaller donors, making sure you've got programs that are open to everybody, that you have a lot of diversity in your programming, that you open it to all age groups, and target those families, because families need something to do for their kids a lot of times. And especially if you've got kids-related programs, something creative. Sometimes they don't cost that much to do. It's a lot of little things like that can help.
Thank you.
And Jennifer, I know you had some questions around fundraising and campaigns.
Both. There are some things we do consistently, some fundraising projects we do consistently, and some we do just, we get creative and do something new. The past year is a great example of that. So for I'll start with our annual giving. We have three main ways people can contribute. There's our annual giving campaign, our Borough Morgan Mill sponsorship, and our Legacy Stone Capital campaign. So the Legacy Stone Capital campaign, that's more of we send out the brochures specifically to the large donors, because that's a big ask. We're not going to send them to somebody who only contributes $20 a year. That doesn't make any sense. So we go to them, we send the information out, then I start making the calls, and I start meeting them in person and talk about, this is what it does. These are the big projects we're doing. We hold a special large donor party at the end of every year where it's basically a Legacy Stone campaign party, where we have panels made to say, hey, here's what we accomplished this year. We have it at the mill where all these capital projects are being held. This is what we did this year. Look at how this has been improved. Here's what we've got coming up. Please consider contributing to the Legacy Stone campaign again in the future. So our annual giving campaign, we send out letters to our full mailing. That's like 1,600 people on our mailing. And in those letters, we have I usually write them up, and I have the board president, the treasurer, and our chair of the fundraising committee look it over for any edits. And basically what we write in that letter is like, in this year we did X, Y, and Z. And here's all the things we accomplished thanks to your contributions last year. In the coming year, we're going to do A, B, and C, and we need your help to continue this goal. And then for some of the people, and then we have the board sit around, and anybody knows personally, we have them write little personal notes on these letters, and then we mail them. So that's how we approach that. It's all about the personal touch instead of just sending out something standard. You don't want it to be too standard, but you want some kind of little personal touch to go in there from time to time. That goes a long way. And our Borough Morgan Mill sponsorship, which we started last year because we lost all our programs. Our programs are all canceled last year. So we needed funds badly. So I launched a Borough Morgan Mill sponsorship drive. And there was a tiered level of giving, and at different levels you could contribute, and all the money went exclusively towards the general operations of our historic. So people can contribute annual giving campaign, which is general operations of the entire organization, the Legacy Stone campaign, which just goes towards capital projects, and the Borough Morgan Mill sponsorship, which goes towards general operations of just the. So we give people those options, and I think that's what people like to see is like, well, I really don't like programming, but I love the mill, but I don't have $5,000 to contribute, so I'll do the sponsorship. And we've also done smaller, we did like a t-shirt fundraiser in last month. We thought we might make a couple $100. We ended up making $700 because we designed some t-shirts, and for each shirt we pocketed, I think it was like $7 per shirt. We ended up selling 100 shirts. We didn't think we were going to sell that many. We were very happy. We more than made our money. So we do little creative things from time to time, and that went for a specific program.
Thank you for that. Let's see. Jennifer also asked, as far as patrons and community involvement are concerned, how do you connect with the community, not necessarily donors, to gain their perspective on exhibits and programs?
Oh, absolutely. That's a good one. Fortunately for where we're at, we're in a small town, and we have two buildings. One is our historic grist mill with 18th century grist wheel, which is about 6 miles south of here. And our main museum, which is a really small museum, and it's also where our offices are at and our historic collections, which is in downtown Berryville. It's the county seat of the county, but it's only 4,000 people. The good thing with that is I go out into the community a lot. I go to county board of supervisors meetings. I volunteer in the community from time to time. In fact, one of the reasons I just got my second COVID vaccination is because I got my first one volunteering at a vaccine clinic here in town. Volunteering for any kind of volunteer opportunities in your community is a great way to build community building, because then you're getting recognition not just for yourself, but for your museum. You talk about what you're doing. You get them interested, and they start seeing you more often. They see you in their businesses, and you start to get to know people. So that is definitely one way to get involved with the people in your community. Is find some volunteer opportunities. Get to know the people that run the businesses in your community. I actually served on the board of the Berryville Main Street Association for 4 years. And that was a great way that I was able to meet a lot of people in the community and connect with
them. And Travis wanted to add on to this question. Can you talk about other types of partnerships, nonprofit partnerships, schools, and also how they may relate to the functions in the museum space, the relationship function in the museum space?
Yeah, I'm not going to lie, without collaborations, you might as well pack it in. I mean, that is what it's all about. It is a win-win situation for any type of, when you're collaborating with other museums, sometimes when you're collaborating with other businesses. We've done that too, even though they're not nonprofits. We've collaborated with them, hey, if you collaborate, can we use your space? It promotes your business and it gives us a unique space to hold an event. There's a lot of different ways to get involved like that. So yeah, collaborations are big deals. Our only space that we have is our historic grist mill, but because it's this 18th century stone grist mill, we can't use it half the year because it's too cold in there. So we oftentimes, especially at the beginning of the year and later in the year, we have to find venues, and that's when we collaborate. And when we do programs at the mill, we invite people out, like our Heritage Day and Colonial Kids Day. We invite other museums and nonprofits to come and set up their stands, bring their reenactors. We want to make the best experience possible. We don't charge anything. It's all about the experience. And it's a great way for them to promote themselves. It gets their people out to come see them. It's a great way for new people who've never known nothing about their organization to learn more about them. There's a lot of ways to collaborate. And like I said, I cannot stress enough how important collaboration is.
Thank you. We have another question. Would you tend to construct new exhibitions by considering what artifacts you have in your collections and developing your content from there? Or do you have a topic in mind and then seek out the needed materials from there? If you do work with the artifacts you have already, how do you keep the material from becoming stale?
So the good thing for us, if the American Alliance Museums not long ago, I can't remember what it was, they did a study and found out that at any given time, any museum, when you go to see their exhibits, you're only seeing less than 10%, in most cases less than 5% of their total collection. So we've got a lot that we can play with. So I'll give you two examples. One would be my first museum job at the University of South Carolina, and next will be here. So here at CCHA, our collections focus on the history of Clarke County. And you think that might be too small and it would get old after a while, especially because we also have a permanent exhibit, but it really doesn't. There's many, many different ways we have a vast collection. We can focus on a certain individual. We can focus on enslaved people. We can focus on school segregation. We can focus on baseball. There's so many different ways we can do it looking at the collection. We're about to acquire we also do something where we celebrate anniversaries of big exhibits or certain anniversaries in the town and county's history. We're about to acquire, hopefully, I'm going to bid on it next week, a collection, 108-page manuscript collection of a former enslaved people's owner here in Clarke County. And in these are slave inventories, probate records, letters he's writing about the enslaved people, his own enslaved people, letters that people have written him about enslaved people, giving us firsthand account of what these people thought and wrote about them. I mean, it's an amazing find. And if we can acquire those, that will be an exhibit by itself. Now, when I was at the McKissick Museum, it was very different. We had a decent sized collection, but we had a lot more space to work with. We had here at my museum, we probably have 60 square feet of space. At McKissick Museum, we had 3 2,700 square foot galleries to work with. And we had to rotate them in and out 6 times a year each. And we obviously didn't have enough in the collection to fill entire exhibits. So a lot of times we would sit down, we would have an exhibit committee that would determine 2 years in advance what exhibits we wanted to do. So it would basically involve the director of exhibits, myself, and the curator of collections. We would do some exhibits in-house. And then if we wanted to do a topic on something, we said, okay, we can do a topic. We have just a small amount of artifacts to go into that. Then we start doing some research and finding out what other museums, what other nonprofits, what other private owners have artifacts or documents or manuscripts that could fit into the collection. And then we start developing loan agreement forms where we borrow them and put them on display at our museum so that we can tell a more complete story.
Oh, thank you. That's really interesting. One of the questions I get from students a lot that I'd like to pose to you, Nathan, is So students in this call, possibly a lot of them probably are at undergrad level, and then we may have some at the master's level, possibly PhD. But can you talk a little bit more about, you mentioned when you were in your master's program, that's when you started getting, actual experience in the museum. You may have had experience before that. But can you talk a little bit more about how can students at this level start getting their foot in the door of museums and getting that experience that will be really highly valued by directors such as yourself when they're eventually looking for work in this field?
Volunteer. Hands down. Find a museum you can volunteer at and make sure it's something hands-on, not something where you're just copying stuff or running errands. I mean, something where you're really hands-on in a department. It could be collections, it could be archives, it could be anything. Something that's hands-on. And it could be in an area that you might not have that much interest in right at first, but you're getting that foot in the door. You're showing that you're committed to learning the craft. It's for the last half of my career, I've been on the side where where I hire people, basically, be it interns or part-time or full-time. And the first thing I look at as somebody who hires is, okay, what kind of hands-on experience you have? Your degree, whatever, that's fine, that's nice. It's important, but it means nothing unless you have that hands-on experience. That's the first thing I look at. Then I'll look at the degree and say, okay, wow, there's a lot of hands-on experience here. Okay, do they have this degree? Oh, they have this degree to go with that. Okay, now that's piqued my curiosity. That answers 80% of my questions right off the bat. It's extremely important. I remember interviewing a guy one time. A little funny story for you. So I was at the Slugger Museum. I had a position for a 25-hour-a-week curatorial intern, and it was it was 2 semesters long, paid pretty well at a for-profit museum. And it was going to be focused on exhibits. And there was this one graduate student from the University of Louisville who applied, and I was very curious. I almost didn't interview him, but in his resume, he had no hands-on experience. He had never volunteered at a museum, nothing. But he was getting a master's degree in public history, and his master's thesis was on exhibitions built for people with disabilities and how they can be improved. So I was curious. So of course I interview him, and I've never been in an interview that went so badly in my life. This guy had 0 people skills, couldn't answer the basic questions, didn't know when I say, can you hammer a nail into a wall? He says, oh, I've hammered a couple of things. Where I was like, yeah, if you're going to hang stuff on the wall in exhibits, I feel like that's a skill set you probably should have had by now. And I even asked him, like, why didn't you volunteer? He's like, oh, I just didn't have the time, which, again, right there makes me think, well, if you didn't have the time for that, what makes you think you have the time for this? So, yes, volunteer, get the hands-on experience. It will not do you wrong. It does it sets the tone, and it really helps make you stand out above other people.
Thank you. We have another question. How are you incorporating digital history into your museum?
This is something that I brought to the table once I got hired, and I'm happy to say that we've really ramped up over the past couple of years. COVID was a good reason for that, but we started conducting oral histories more often. 20 years ago, they were doing it on cassette tapes, and they were very, very poorly. Now we're doing these oral histories digitally. Sometimes they're recorded Zoom interviews, and sometimes they are just digital audio recordings, and then we upload them to a separate section we have a SoundCloud page where we upload all of that. We also have a digital section of our archives that we can just pull up interviews, videos, recordings of programs we've done, videos of people at programs. So that's a way we're incorporating all of this digital. So we start recording videos of the mill, the process of operating the mill from start to finish. We did behind the scenes recordings of abandoned Cold War bunkers. That was pretty cool. So yeah, we still got a lot to do, but last year we also 2 years ago, we bought a high res digital scanner, much better than anything we've ever had. It can scan up to like 1500 DPI, and it scans through books at a rapid pace, and it saves it as a high quality PDF, and it even identifies words, so it indexes the documents for you. So we're still a lot of work to go, but considering we had zero digital collection of anything when I started, I'd say we're making some significant progress.
That's great. And another question that just came in, I think it's called accessioning software,
Yes.
do you use?
Yes.
I've not
We
heard
use
that term before.
Yes, I'm very happy that somebody has used that term. Yes, we use Past Perfect, which is, for a long time, has been kind of the standard for a lot of museums, especially smaller museums. In the next few years, that might change because Past Perfect really doesn't have any type of cloud-based software that's good enough. We're looking at rediscovery. They have come leaps and bounds. 20 years ago, it would have been no question. Past Perfect over Rediscovery is not even close. Rediscovery was better for art museums and larger museums like the MoMA or the Met, not small museums, not user-friendly. Rediscovery's come a long way. Our archivist is very high on it, and she has convinced me that when we get the funds to do it, we should look at doing this, but she's still got a lot of work to do to get our collection organized. Then it's just a matter of transferring everything over, because then it's cloud-based. Then it's something that, let's say, for example, she goes out to meet somebody who wants to lend something to our collection. She can pull it up right there. She can add it in right there. She can make changes to the collection wherever she's at. She can do it from the archive. She can do it from home. It makes things a lot easier.
Then to follow up, Jennifer asked, how do you handle de-accessioning?
Ooh, that is the tricky thing for collections, is the de-accessioning. Nobody likes to talk about it, but everybody does it. The de-accessioning, so we had to do, we're still in the middle of some massive de-accessioning. The first thing we did is, so we had an archivist here that had been here for 33 years. Great woman, she was amazing. She was also not professionally trained. So we're talking 33 years of not exactly the best methods of archiving a collection. When we hired our new archivist, who did have the professional training, the first thing we did was sit down with our archives committee and put out a plan, a de-accessioning plan, an official CCHA de-accessioning plan to say, okay, here's how we're going to do it. Step one, we identify items in the collection that have no relevance whatsoever to Clarke County, and there's so many. Number two, after those have been identified, we then bring a list to the archives committee to see if these are worthy of de-accessioning. If they are, then we determine who has ownership, who gifted those items to us, and then we reach out to them and notify them. We must make due diligence, at least, to notify the people, hey, we're de-accessioning these items, do you want them back? If we do not hear back from them, then we put them somewhere where we can eventually auction them off or give them away as prizes at events or something like that. Because then at that point, we technically state that it is our own. We've done due diligence. They've been in our collection. Nobody's claimed ownership. We thus now claim ownership. And that's how we got rid of a lot of items in our collection. A lot. I mean, we've had some items didn't need to follow ownership. For example, we freed up so many archival file folders because our previous archivist would be on the internet and see a story about Clarke County and print it out and accession it. That's not how accessioning works. So we had to just basically take all of these out and de-accession all of these. Newspaper clippings. We have all the newspapers in bound copies in our collection. We don't need newspaper clippings from newspapers we already have. Had to remove all of those. Copies from books that didn't belong to us. Had to remove that. A ceramic cat playing with a ball of yarn. Had to get rid of that. I mean, there's no connection to Clarke County whatsoever. So yeah, it is a tricky process. It's not a process you really want to publicize at all, because it can be misinterpreted by the public very, very easily. but it is every museum has to do it.
Right, we're almost out of time, so I want to make sure all the questions that you all would like to ask, feel free to continue populating those in the chat or turning on your mic. I was just curious, personally, what do you like most about your job, and also maybe what's the most challenging thing about your job?
The thing I like most about my job, God, I don't know. There's so much. I mean, I just like coming to work every day. I get to do what I do. It never feels like a job. Like, I love what I do so much. I love the people I work with. I like it more than anything, I will say. I like being the one that calls odds and working with people. I also like the historic grist mill. When the mill's open, I'm there every Saturday helping get the stones turning and the corn and the wheat ground, doing it like they did in the 18th century. It's sort of like this, Monday through Friday, you're behind the desk a lot. You're writing grants, you're fundraising, you're paying the bills, you're writing checks. But then on Saturday, you're there and you realize what it's all about. You're back doing that hands-on history, and it's like you're dressed up in your period outfit, and you're doing the hands-on history with other people who just like doing what they just love volunteering there, and that's probably my favorite part about this. Biggest challenge, aside from working on the board, I would say lately. I'm saying aside from working for a board, I would say lately has been the Confederate memorial issue. That has been a challenge. You have to walk a fine line as a museum director or even on staff because it's a very toxic environment when it comes to that. We live in a rural county that's very, very proud of their Confederate history. And some of these are your big donors. As much as I would like to roll my eyes, it kills me. I cannot tell you how much I feel a part of myself die inside when somebody says the removal of a Confederate memorial is erasing history. It is all I can do not to say, when was the last time you were at a museum or an historic battlefield or a national park? When was the last time you actually looked at historic artifacts, documents, photographs? When was the last time? When was the last time you even visited the monument? And so the line that I always sell is like, monuments come, monuments go. Museums are the keepers of the actual history. If you want to learn more about that era of history, come to a museum, look at the research, look at the archives, see what we've got, and then make your own determination from there. But make an informed judgment, not a knee-jerk reaction. That's been the biggest challenge because as much as I would like to say you're all idiots, you lost. You're all idiots. You do have to remember that you are operating in for the public good, and the public good means everybody, even including people you don't disagree with. That you do.
Thank you. That was really great. Any final questions for Nathan today? And I've also put Nathan's LinkedIn address in the chat, so feel free to connect with him. And while he's up in Virginia, the last question I had, Nathan, is do you ever have opportunities for volunteers, for interns, for professional, staff to come in who have their bachelor's degrees?
All the time. All the time we do. We are always looking for volunteers. Anybody who ever, we've had so many people come in here say, hey, I just want to get some experience. Can, I come in? Yeah, absolutely. In fact, our education coordinator, she's one of those great success stories. She came in I think I was on the job about 4 months, and she came in as an undergrad with her history class. And after the class, I gave her a tour of the museum, and afterwards she says, hey, can I volunteer for you? I'd love to intern here. I was like, yeah. She volunteered for a semester and helped me put some educational programs together. And then the next year, that summer, I was able to offer her a paid summer internship. She absolutely blew my mind with how good she was, how natural she was at doing what she did. And then over time, she kept volunteering, just coming back and volunteering. And I got to a point where I came to my board and I said, look, our fundraising has been doing well lately. I would like to hire an education coordinator to be part-time. and I would really like to make this a permanent position. And before I had like a stack of papers to prove why she was the one I wanted. First question I got before I said anything else was, "Do you have someone in mind?" I said, "Yeah, it would be Taylor." And they're like, "Oh, well then, yeah, it's fine," because they all also saw the work that she had been doing, and she was just perfect for the job. And so I was able to hire her right there.
That's great. And one last question, Nathan.
Mhm.
Michael asks, as a curator at an art museum, does the job cover health insurance?
Does the job cover health insurance? Mine does not. A lot of the small museums, it really is on a museum by museum basis. Mine does not. We're really small. That was one thing they said right off the bat is that, we can't offer to pay health insurance. That's something you have to get on your own. Um, I would say most museums probably do in some way, shape, or form, especially if it's one that's, by the, in a line item with the county. So you've got those, so it would be a county, it's a government institution, so they are required to pay those benefits. But mine does not. I also see a question here from Raquel. I understand this relates more to finding position and curating. How does one focus towards working as a director? So my advice on that is to work your way up, find the area that you like to work in, and then find a way to where you are the head of that area. It could be a small museum, it could be a larger museum. Finding your way up to where you're head of a department, and then wear as many hats as possible. Especially if you develop those grant writing skills, get those grant writing skills. That will certainly help, because once you start moving up and you become head of a department, then you're starting to learn how to do a budget. That's incredibly important. Grant writing, budgeting. That's how I got this job. Honestly, I think that was the biggest reason was I had experience doing budget. So I was at the Slugger Museum. I hired people. I was responsible for my department's own budget. So I had to know how to do that, and that was very, very important because I was responsible for the entire organization's budget. So those would be the two things I would say is work your way up in your area, get into an area where once you're head of that area, you would be doing some budgeting and grant writing. That would be that first step to get into working your way into being a director, because you're not going to be a director because you like history or have read a lot of historical book, read a lot of history. You're going to get it because you know how to manage and you know how to manage people.
That's
I'm also
great.
put in
Go
my
ahead.
email address too.
Oh, thank you.
This is the best way
Very
to reach
helpful.
me, hands down. Definitely the best way to reach me anytime.
Nathan, thank you so much. This has been so extremely helpful, and I've certainly learned a lot just about what you do as a director and curator. And I would love to come up and hopefully see your museum someday. That sounds like a really fun. Is it a day trip? I don't know how far it is from Charlotte up to
It's
where
about
you are in
5 hours.
Virginia.
It's about 5 hours
5
from Charlotte.
hours, maybe an
Yeah,
overnight trip.
yeah.
But that
It would be an
sounds
overnight trip. I've
really
made the
fun.
drive a few times.
Uh-huh. That sounds really great. But can we give Nathan a virtual applause? But yeah, feel free to reach out to him if you have follow-up questions. And just for all of you, just know that AJ, my colleague, AJ Simmons and I are here to help you if you are trying to get into this field and you want someone to speak with and help with your resume, cover letters, interview search, all of that stuff. But Nathan, thank you so much. This has been extremely helpful. And I'll hang on the line just in case anybody has questions, but I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.